The Galactic Concordat prided itself on being the pinnacle of evolutionary achievement, a collective of the most advanced predator species this side of the Sagittarius arm. They had grand halls decorated with the skulls of extinct threats, bureaucratic departments dedicated to maintaining the natural order, and enough military firepower to vaporize small moons. All very impressive, if you're into that sort of thing. For 10,000 years, the Concordat had classified every sapient species they encountered on their precious predation index. The scale ranged from lowly Class 1 herbivores, essentially mobile salads with opinions, to the much-revered Class 10 apex hunters. Status, political power, and territorial rights all flowed from where a species landed on this glorified food chain. The Vreks, with their triple-rowed teeth and pack-hunting instincts, had long enjoyed the Class 9 rating and the accompanying privileges. The Zedkli mantis folk weren't far behind, having evolved from ambush predators with a taste for their own kind. Charming dinner guests, those two. Oh, and then there were the humans. When first contact occurred, the Concordat's xenobiologists nearly pulled a muscle laughing. These bipedal creatures from the unremarkable Sol system, with their flat teeth, weak claws, and pitiful excuse for natural armor, were immediately classified as Class 3, opportunistic omnivores with negligible predatory capability. Essentially, slightly ambitious. How adorable! Look at their physiology, snorted Grand Archon Krex of the Vrex Dominion during the Classification Council. His tail swept across the holographic display of human anatomical charts. No significant natural weapons, limited sensory capabilities, endurance-based locomotion rather than speed or power. They're glorified persistence foragers at best. The assembled representatives of 17 predator species rumbled with amusement. The Zedkli ambassador clicked her mandibles in the particular rhythm that indicated derision mixed with pity. And yet, said the lone dissenter, Science Minister Tezix, tapping a talon against the table, they did manage to become the dominant species on a planet with significantly larger predators. Through tool use and pack behavior, dismissed Krex. Many Class 3 and 4 species develop rudimentary technologies as compensation for their evolution. What the Grand Archon and his colleagues failed to appreciate, a failure that would soon prove monumentally embarrassing, was that humans hadn't evolved to be apex predators in the traditional sense. They had evolved to become something far more dangerous. Apex adapters. The humans accepted their classification with smiles that the Concordat mistook for submission rather than what they actually were, quiet amusement. They played along, taking their assigned seats at the diplomatic tables, the small ones near the waste disposal units, accepting trade agreements that undervalued their resources, and nodding politely during lectures about the natural galactic hierarchy. But then came the incident at mining outpost Theta 16. Theta 16 was a hellscape of a moon, with toxic atmospheric composition, gravity that made even the sturdiest species feel like they were carrying a small star on their shoulders, and temperature fluctuations that could crack specialized environmental suits. The Concordat used it primarily as a punishment posting for bureaucrats who asked too many questions about the Grand Archon's expense accounts. When a catastrophic containment failure threatened to destroy the outpost and release enough radioactive material to render the entire system uninhabitable, the evacuation order went out. The only ship close enough to respond was a human trading vessel making its first circuit through Concordat space. "Absolutely not," barked the Vrex security chief when the humans volunteered to assist with the rescue. "Your Class 3 physiology would collapse within moments of exposure to those conditions. We'll wait for properly equipped Concordat forces." The human captain, a weathered individual with a face that suggested they'd seen more than their share of dangerous situations, just smiled. Not the submissive smile the Concordat was used to, but something else entirely. Something with teeth. With all due respect to your biological classification system, which I'm sure is very scientific and not at all a convenient way to justify your political structure, we're going in. Before the sputtering security chief could respond, the humans were deploying to the surface in suits that looked decidedly inadequate by Concordat standards. The Vrex and Zedkali rescue specialists watched the monitors with what passed for morbid fascination in their cultures, expecting to document a case study in the fatal overconfidence of inferior species. Instead, they witnessed something that would send ripples through the Concordat's carefully ordered understanding of the universe. The humans moved through Theta 16's hostile environment with a fluid adaptability that defied their supposed limitations. When their equipment failed, as it inevitably did in those conditions, they improvised. When standard procedures proved ineffective, they abandoned them without hesitation and tried something else. When the situation demanded physical endurance beyond what should have been possible for their species, they simply Claudine continued. "Are they even aware they should be dead by now?" asked a junior Zetli officer, mandibles twitching nervously as they watched the humans drag 3 times their body weight in Vrex survivors through superheated terrain. The security chief didn't answer. He was too busy recalibrating his understanding of the universe. By the time the Concordat rescue forces arrived, the humans had evacuated all 27 personnel and stabilized the containment system through a series of technical improvisations that the Concordat engineers would later describe as alarmingly effective despite violating 17 fundamental engineering principles. The captain of the human vessel, now back aboard their ship and enjoying what they called coffee, a stimulant beverage that would cause cardiac arrest in most Class 8 and above predators, received a transmission from Grand Archon Krex himself. "Your assistance at Theta 16 was unexpected," the Vrex leader stated, clearly struggling to find appropriate diplomatic language. "The Concordat acknowledges your service." The human smiled again, that same unsettling expression. "Happy to help, though I suspect your classification system might need some updating." "Our system has served the Concordat for 10 millennia, Krex replied stiffly. "It is based on immutable biological principles." "Is it, though?" The human took another sip of their beverage. "Because it seems to me that your definition of predator might be a bit limited." The Grand Archon's scales rippled in the pattern that indicated deep offense. "You suggest that you, a species without significant natural weapons, are comparable to evolved hunters, like the Vrex?" "I'm suggesting," the human said, leisurely setting down their cup, "that perhaps the most dangerous predator isn't the one with the biggest teeth or the sharpest claws. Maybe it's the one that can adapt to hunt anything, anywhere, under any conditions. The one that turns weaknesses into strengths and limitations into opportunities. The one that, when told something is impossible, takes it as a personal challenge." The transmission ended shortly after, with the customary diplomatic platitudes. But throughout the grand halls of the Concordat, an uncomfortable question began to circulate among the highest-ranked predator species. What if they had fundamentally misunderstood what made a species truly dangerous? They would soon find out, much to their collective regret, that teeth and claws were just one way to be an apex predator. Humans had found another path altogether, and the galaxy was woefully unprepared for what that meant. As one particularly insightful ZKT scholar would later write in what became the definitive analysis of human concordat relations, "We thought ourselves apex predators because we evolved to kill efficiently. Humans evolved to solve problems efficiently, including, as it turns out, the problem of how to kill apex predators." After the Theta 16 incident, the Concordat's High Council decided that a proper diplomatic mission to Earth was in order. Not because they were concerned, mind you, certainly not, but because thorough documentation of all sapient species was standard protocol. The fact that they assigned their most prestigious xenoanthropologists and a security detail sufficient to subjugate a small moon was purely coincidental. "This is a scientific expedition," Grand Archon Krex emphasized to the assembled delegation. "We simply require more accurate data to properly categorize these humans." Nobody mentioned that the Concordat hadn't needed a 50-member research team and 3 warships to classify any other Class 3 species in recent memory. Questioning the Grand Archon's decisions was generally considered career suicide, often literally. The diplomatic vessel Unyielding Dominance entered Earth's solar system with all the subtlety of a supernova, broadcasting its superiority through both communication channels and architectural design. Its hull was adorned with the skulls of conquered species, a traditional Concordat flourish that their cultural attachés insisted was received positively across all known civilizations. The attachés had remarkably high turnover rates, Earth's governing bodies, displaying what the Concordat would later recognize as characteristic restraint, welcomed the delegation with polite diplomatic protocols rather than the expected awestruck submission. This was the first warning sign. Had the Concordat representatives been paying attention, the humans designated a meeting location in a region they called Alaska, a choice that puzzled the delegation until they realized it matched the environmental preferences of the cold-adapted Vrex. The gesture was interpreted as appropriate deference, rather than what it actually was, strategic hospitality. "We've prepared accommodations according to the biological specifications you provided," explained the lead human diplomat, gesturing toward a complex of buildings nestled between snow-covered mountains. "And we've arranged several cultural exchange activities that we hope will foster mutual understanding." Admiral Zex Kara of the Zekli Swarm, leading the security contingent, clicked her mandibles skeptically. "Cultural exchange seems premature given your species' developmental stage." The human diplomat smiled, that same unsettling expression their captain had displayed at Theta 16. "Perhaps, but we're eager to learn." The first cultural exchange was a hunting expedition. The Concordat representatives, particularly the Vrex, had agreed enthusiastically. What better way to demonstrate the natural order than through ritualized predation? The humans called it sport fishing and took them to a remote river location accessible only by small aircraft. What followed was a masterclass in humiliation disguised as hospitality. The Vrex, apex aquatic hunters on their homeworld, waded confidently into the frigid water with their natural hunting adaptations on full display, sensory organs capable of detecting the bioelectric fields of prey, webbed claws evolved for underwater grappling, and jaws that could crush durasteel. The humans use sticks with string. "The goal is to catch the fish without eating it," explained their guide, demonstrating the technique they called fly fishing. "What purpose does that serve?" rumbled Subarchon Drex, second in command of the Concordat delegation. "It's fun," replied the guide. "Fun?" repeated Drex, as though the word were written in an incomprehensible alien script. By midday, the tally stood at humans 27, fish caught and released, Concordat delegation 0 fish and 3 cases of hypothermia. The Vrex representatives had never failed at hunting in recorded history. Their cultural attaché was already drafting resignation letters. "Perhaps we could try something more land-based," suggested Admiral Zex Kara, whose Zektli biology was particularly ill-suited to the cold water. The humans readily agreed, switching to what they called a wilderness survival workshop. The Concordat representatives brightened considerably. Now they were in familiar territory. Except they weren't. The workshop began reasonably enough, with the humans demonstrating various techniques for creating shelter, finding water, and identifying edible flora. The Concordat delegates observed, with the patronizing attention of university professors attending a preschool science fair. Then the weather changed. "The storm front is moving in faster than expected," announced the human guide, checking a primitive wrist-mounted device. "We need to establish shelter and secure resources immediately." What followed was a cascade of failures that would later be redacted from all official Concordat records. The wrecks, built for short bursts of predatory speed, found themselves exhausted by the constant activity required to prepare adequate shelter. The ZKT, whose hive mind efficiency required clear pheromonal communication, found their chemical signals disrupted by the rapidly changing atmospheric conditions. Meanwhile, the humans, those supposedly inferior Class 3 omnivores, adapted with disturbing ease. They modified their techniques based on changing conditions, distributed labor efficiently, without hierarchical commands, and most disturbingly, appeared to be enjoying the challenge. "Is this entertaining for you?" demanded Admiral Zex Kara, as freezing rain pelted her exoskeleton, watching a human effortlessly construct a waterproof shelter from seemingly inadequate materials. The human looked up, genuinely surprised. "Well, yeah. I mean, it's not a luxury resort. But there's something satisfying about testing yourself against the elements, don't you think?" The Admiral did not in fact think that. By nightfall, the situation had deteriorated further. The storm had intensified beyond the predictions of both human and concordant meteorological technology. Communications were down, visibility was nil, and the temperature had dropped to levels that even the cold-adapted wrecks found concerning. "We must abort this exercise," declared Subarchon Drex, dignity abandoned in favor of survival. "Return us to your settlement immediately." The human guide shook their head. "No way to get transportation in these conditions. We're stuck here until morning at least." "Unacceptable," hissed Zexkara. "Your primitive settlement is only 20 kilometers from this location. We will proceed on foot." The human's expression changed then, showing the first signs of genuine concern. "That would be a death march in these conditions." "Perhaps for your species," the Admiral replied. 3 hours later, the search and rescue team found Admiral Zexkara and Sub-Ashon Drex half buried in snow, their advanced thermal regulation technology having failed in the face of the blinding snowstorm. Of the 6 Concordat representatives who had attempted the journey, only these 2 had survived. Saved only by the emergency locator beacons the humans had insisted they carry. The human rescue team had traveled the same 20 kilometers through the same conditions, carrying equipment that outweighed them, navigating through near-zero visibility in terrain they couldn't possibly have memorized. "How?" demanded Zexkara from her medical pod, mandibles weak with exhaustion. "How did you find us in those conditions?" The human rescue coordinator shrugged. "That's the job." The diplomatic mission continued for another 3 standard cycles, each activity revealing new and unsettling facets of human capability. They displayed problem-solving approaches that Concordat psychologists classified as pathologically innovative. They showed pain tolerance that bordered on the biologically impossible. Most disturbing of all, they exhibited an almost predatory delight in situations that should have triggered fear responses. When the unyielding dominance finally departed Earth's atmosphere, its crew was uncharacteristically subdued. The mission report sent back to the Concordat High Council contained a recommendation that would send shockwaves through the galactic political structure. Preliminary findings suggest current classification of Terran humans may require significant revision. The addendum, written by a junior xenobiologist who had spent more time directly observing the humans than her superiors, was even more troubling. They're not simply adapting to their environment. They're adapting their environment to themselves, and they're doing it faster than evolution should allow. most concerning of all, they appear to have evolved to enjoy the process. In the grand halls of the Concordat, the report was met with disbelief, then anger, then finally grudging concern. Grand Archon Krex, however, was not convinced. Arminal diplomatic misadventure does not invalidate 10,000 years of taxonomic science, he declared to the assembled High Council. If these humans truly believe they belong in the higher classifications, then let them prove it through the ancient traditions of the Concordat. And so, with the arrogant certainty that had served the Concordat so well for millennia, they decided to subject humans to the trials of apex ascension, a series of challenges that no species had successfully completed in over 3,000 years. There was no way these soft, clawless omnivores could survive what was coming. The natural order would be restored. The Concordat was certain of it. The humans, when informed of the challenge, responded with a message so brief that many Concordat translators assumed it was incomplete. Bring it on. They didn't understand yet that for humans, the impossible wasn't a barrier, it was an invitation. The trials of apex ascension were traditionally held on Crexus Prime, the Vrex homeworld, a planet with gravity 1.3 times that of Earth, atmospheric pressure that would crush most species' respiratory systems, and ambient temperatures that fluctuated between uncomfortably warm and literally boiling water. The Concordat considered these conditions neutral ground. The human delegation arrived in a vessel that Concordat military analysts described as insultingly inadequate, a retrofitted cargo hauler with minimal weaponry and defensive capabilities. What the analysts failed to note was the extensive customization for environmental adaptability and the conspicuous absence of escape pods. These humans hadn't packed for failure. Representatives from 17 predator species gathered in the ancient arena of dominance to witness what they assumed would be a brief and educational humiliation. Gambling pools had already formed, though not on whether the humans would fail, that was considered inevitable, but rather on how quickly and spectacularly they would do so. The Earth delegation consisted of just 5 individuals, led by a seasoned diplomat who'd clearly been selected for their ability to maintain composure while being condescended to by 17 different species simultaneously. The rest were specialists whose expertise would soon become nauseatingly apparent to the Concordat. The trials of apex ascension have stood for 10,000 years as the ultimate test of predatory capability, announced Grand Archon Krex, his amplified voice echoing through the arena. No species has completed all 5 trials in over 3 millennia. The human diplomat nodded respectfully. We appreciate the opportunity to participate in your traditions. The first trial is the hunt of discernment, continued Krex, either missing or ignoring the subtle emphasis on your. You will be transported to the obsidian wastes and tasked with tracking and capturing, not killing, a Daggerclaw Alpha. You have 1 planetary rotation to succeed. What Krex omitted. Daggerclaw Alphas were apex predators, even by Vrex standards. 2 metric tons of armored rage with sensory organs that could detect a single drop of blood from 10 kilometers away, and claws that could shred military-grade alloys. The obsidian wastes were a volcanic hellscape where visibility rarely exceeded 5 meters due to constant ash storms. The humans didn't flinch. When do we start? 6 hours later, the viewing gallery erupted in confusion as the tracking feeds showed the impossible. All 5 humans, alive, converging on a Daggerclaw Alpha from different directions. They had split up, a suicide tactic against such a predator, and somehow coordinated without communications technology, which the electromagnetic properties of the obsidian wastes rendered useless. They're using the ash storms as cover, observed Admiral Zexkara, mandibles twitching in reluctant admiration, moving only when the wind shifts to mask their scent. Primitive hunting techniques, dismissed Krex, though his scales had taken on the discoloration pattern of uncertainty. Then came the capture itself, executed with such methodical precision that several Concordat military officers began taking notes. The humans used the environment against the creature, triggering a controlled landslide to limit its movement, deploying countermeasures to confuse its sensory organs, and finally immobilizing it with a synthetic webbing that adapted to the creature's struggles. And the humans returned to the arena, filthy, injured, but successful. The gambling pools went silent. "Luck," muttered Krex. "The second trial is the endurance of will." What followed was meant to be a breaking point, 72 hours of continuous testing while exposed to escalating environmental extremes. Temperature fluctuations, atmospheric pressure changes, gravity modulation, all while solving complex cognitive puzzles that required peak mental function. Most species failed within the first 24 hours. The current record, held by the ZCLI, was 36. The humans completed the full 72. They did it by rotating leadership based on who was best adapted to current conditions, sleep cycling in short bursts and, most disturbingly to the observers, engaging in something they called gallows humor that seemed to increase their resilience as conditions worsened. "They're laughing," reported a bewildered Concordat psychologist. "The puzzles in Phase 6 have driven multiple species to permanent psychosis, and they're making jokes about them." By the third trial, a complex diplomatic simulation designed to test predatory instinct under political constraint, the Concordat observers had abandoned pretense. They weren't witnessing an evaluation anymore, they were conducting a threat assessment. The fourth trial, focusing on technological adaptation, was particularly revealing. Given unfamiliar alien technology and minimal instruction, contestants had to repurpose it to overcome a series of escalating threats. The humans didn't just adapt the technology, they improved it. By the end of the trial, they had created hybrid systems that the original designers examined with disturbing interest. "They don't think like engineers," one ZCLI technician noted. "They think like evolutionary algorithms with opposable thumbs." The final trial was the most ancient. Ritual combat against a succession of predator champions, culminating in a confrontation with a Vrex elite warrior. The humans were permitted to select their single best combatant. They chose their smallest member. What followed was not the raw power display the Concordat expected, but a masterclass in efficiency. The human didn't try to overpower their opponents. They simply identified and exploited weaknesses with surgical precision. Against the Vrex champion, a mountain of evolved killing capability, they employed a fighting style based entirely around using the opponent's strength against them. When it ended, the human stood victorious, breathing heavily but still standing. Across the arena floor lay the succession of defeated champions, none dead, but all thoroughly humbled. "This concludes the trials of Apex Ascension," announced Krex, his voice notably subdued. "The Concordat acknowledges your unexpected success." The human delegation's leader stepped forward. "Then you'll reconsider our classification?" Krex's scales rippled with barely suppressed emotion. "The High Council will deliberate on the matter." "I don't think you understand," the human replied, their voice carrying easily across the now silent arena. "That wasn't a request. The trials were your way of understanding us. Consider what you've learned." The implicit threat hung in the air like the ash of the obsidian wastes. In the following days, emergency sessions of the High Council convened behind locked doors. The Concordat faced an unprecedented situation. A species that defied their classificatory framework, a prey species with the capabilities of an apex predator but without the expected biological markers. What frightened them most wasn't what they had seen, it was what remained unseen. If this was what 5 humans could do when playing by concordant rules, what could billions do if they decided to make their own? For 3 standard cycles, the Concordat High Council remained sequestered in their hallowed chambers. Outside, rumors spread through the 17-member species like a particularly aggressive virus. Security forces were placed on high alert. Military vessels conducted routine exercises suspiciously close to Earth's solar system. The galactic economy experienced what economists delicately termed predator uncertainty fluctuations. Meanwhile, the human delegation waited with that peculiar patience their species had demonstrated throughout the trials. Not the passive acceptance of prey, but the calculated restraint of something confident in its place in the food chain. When the council doors finally opened, Grand Archon Krex emerged, looking like he'd aged a millennium. His once vibrant scales had dulled to the matte finish of profound existential distress. The Concordat High Council has reached a decision regarding the classification of humans, he announced to the assembled diplomatic corps. After thorough evaluation of the trial results and additional data, we hereby classify humans as... He paused, his jaw working silently, as though the words physically pained him. Class X. A collective gasp echoed through the grand hall. No species had ever received a Class X designation. It didn't officially exist in the taxonomy. A new classification. The human diplomatic leader's expression remained neutral, but their eyes gleamed with something the Concordat's xenopsychologists would later identify as barely contained amusement. Your species defies conventional categorization, Kalex admitted, each word extracted like a painful tooth. You lack the evolutionary markers of apex predators, yet demonstrate capabilities that exceed our established parameters. What Krex wasn't saying, what the classified council reports spelled out in alarming detail, was that humans weren't just good at hunting. They were good at everything. They could adapt to any environment, solve any problem, overcome any obstacle, and most disturbingly, they seemed to enjoy doing it. They were apex omnivores, consuming resources, knowledge, and challenges with equal appetite. The Concordat formally acknowledges humanity's unique position and extends an invitation for full membership with all associated privileges, Krex continued, following the script that had been painstakingly negotiated during those 3 tense cycles. The human diplomat smiled, that same unsettling expression that now triggered involuntary defensive postures among several council members. We appreciate the recognition, but our analysis suggests a direct alliance would be more equitable than membership. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. No species had ever declined Concordat membership. The concept didn't compute in their rigidly hierarchical worldview. Admiral Zexkara, who had been uncharacteristically silent since the conclusion of the trials, stepped forward. Explain. The Concordat operates on a principle of evolved biological superiority, the human replied. Our studies indicate this framework is unnecessarily limiting. We propose a more adaptive approach to galactic cooperation. You wish to dismantle a system that has maintained order for 10,000 years? Krex's voice carried a dangerous edge. Not dismantle, the human corrected smoothly. Evolve, much like we did. And there it was, the fundamental revelation that had kept the council locked away for 3 cycles, examining and re-examining human evolutionary history until the truth became undeniable. Humans hadn't evolved as apex predators, they had evolved as something far more dangerous, a species that could become whatever they needed to be. Their greatest adaptation wasn't physical, it was their capacity for adaptation itself. Perhaps, suggested the human, into the stunned silence. A demonstration would clarify our position. With a gesture, they activated a holographic display that filled the center of the hall. It showed solar system after solar system, each containing planets in various stages of terraforming. In the time since first contact, we've established colonies in 7 previously uninhabitable systems, the human explained casually, as though discussing the weather, each presenting unique challenges that we've adapted to overcome. The Concordat representatives stared in disbelief. The most aggressive expansion program in their history had managed 3 new colonies in a standard decade. The humans had established 7 in less than a cycle. "How?" demanded a Zcatlai scientist, mandibles clicking rapidly in distress. "We're very motivated problem solvers," the human replied with a shrug, "and we get bored easily." As the implications sank in, the mood in the hall shifted from shock to something approaching panic. A species that could adapt this quickly, that treated the impossible as a temporary inconvenience, that seemed to thrive on challenges that would break other civilizations. Such a species didn't just upset the carefully maintained predator hierarchy, it rendered it obsolete. Grand Archon Krex, millennia of political instinct overriding his personal dismay, moved to salvage the situation. The Concordat acknowledges humanity's unique approaches and is prepared to negotiate an alliance of equals. The human diplomat nodded appreciatively. "That's a good start. Our terms are simple: open exchange of knowledge, mutual defense, and the immediate reclassification of all sentient species based on demonstrated capabilities rather than evolutionary history." "You would elevate prey species to equal standing?" hissed a Rex counselor in disbelief. The human's expression hardened slightly. "We would eliminate the concept of prey species from diplomatic discourse entirely. Evolution may have determined where we all started, but it doesn't dictate where we're going." As negotiations proceeded over the following days, a new understanding gradually dawned on the Concordat leadership. The humans weren't interested in replacing them at the top of the galactic food chain. They wanted to dismantle the food chain altogether. Perhaps most terrifying of all was the realization that spread through the Concordat's ruling classes. Humans didn't think like predators. Predators sought to dominate within existing systems. Humans looked at systems themselves and asked, "How can we make this better?" And if they couldn't find an answer, they built something new. In the end, the Concordat, that 10,000-year-old bastion of evolutionary determinism, found itself doing something unprecedented: adapting. The Treaty of Terra, signed 1 standard cycle later, restructured galactic civilization around cooperation rather than domination. As Admiral Zexkera observed to her staff after the signing ceremony, "We thought ourselves apex predators because we evolved to rule our environments. Humans evolved to change theirs. In the cosmic scale of things, which adaptation seems more advanced?" The galaxy had indeed realized humans were apex predators, just not in the way anyone had expected. They weren't at the top of the food chain. They had simply grown tired of the concept altogether and decided to build something new. The truly terrifying part? It only took them about a week to figure out how.